The sun was sinking slow, a blood-red circle melting into the dusty Wyoming horizon. The sky burned with streaks of orange and gold, and the land, wide, empty, and endless, seemed to hold its breath. The air was thick with heat and sorrow, the kind that clings to your skin and settles deep in your bones. The only sound came from the windmill creaking in rhythm with the groan of the old barn door, and the low restless snorts of horses that felt the tension long before any words were spoken. Jeb Callahan stood just outside that barn, the dying sunlight cutting his tall frame in two, half in light, half in shadow. His jaw was tight, his rough hands trembling slightly at his sides. He was a man used to control, of cattle, of weathered men, of life itself on the open range. But nothing could have prepared him for the sight before him now. Clara. She was on her knees in the dirt, her dress torn, her hair tangled with dust, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The once proud woman he'd loved, the same one who used to sing while she brushed the horses, who laughed louder than thunder, was barely recognizable. She was thinner, her eyes hollow, her face marked with bruises. Yet beneath all that ruin, Jeb could still see the woman he'd once believed was his forever. "I beg you," she whispered, her voice shaking like glass about to break. "Just make it quick." The words hit Jeb like a whip. His hand instinctively went to the revolver at his hip, the same Colt that had ended gunfights and put down wounded animals, but this time, it felt heavier than iron. He couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. It had been 3 years since Clara had left him, 3 long, cruel years that had ground him down into someone he barely recognized. She'd gone off with a man named Duke Harlan, a smooth-talking drifter who promised her a life of golden excitement. Jeb had begged her to stay, told her that love was worth more than silver or whiskey. But she'd turned her back without a word, leaving him with nothing but an empty house and a cold bed. And now she was here, broken, desperate, covered in someone else's sins. He could see the dust rising behind her, the faint gray cloud of horses kicking up the trail. Riders. Fast. Armed. The kind of men who didn't stop until blood was spilled. "They're coming for me," Clara said hoarsely, her voice barely above the whisper of the wind. "They won't stop until I'm dead, Jeb. Please, don't let them take me. Don't let them." She swallowed hard, eyes filling with tears. "You owe me that much mercy." Mercy. The word cut through him like a knife. He wanted to hate her, wanted to remember how she'd left without looking back, how her letters never came, how his nights were filled with whiskey and silence instead of laughter. But hate wouldn't come, not when he saw her like this. He took a step forward, his boots crunching in the dry earth. "You sure this is what you want?" he asked quietly. His voice was rough, almost foreign to his own ears. Clara nodded, her chin trembling. "Better you than them." The wind picked up, sweeping through the barnyard, sending dust spiraling around them. In the distance, a lone coyote howled, a long, sorrowful sound that made the horses in the corral stamp and snort nervously. The riders were closer now. Jeb could make out faint shouts and the distant glint of rifles catching the dying sun. He should have drawn his gun. Should have done what she asked and ended her pain quickly, cleanly. But he couldn't. His hands were frozen, his heart caught between rage and something far worse, love that refused to die. He looked down at her, remembering her laughter echoing across the pastures, the way her hand used to fit perfectly into his. "You picked one hell of a time to come home," he muttered, half to himself. Clara's lips quivered into a broken smile. "Maybe I never should have left." The words tore something inside him. He turned his face away, jaw clenched, trying to swallow the ache building in his chest. The thundering hooves were louder now, too close to ignore. "Jeb," she said softly, "please." He looked at her one last time, the woman who'd shattered him and still somehow owned his soul. The sun was almost gone now, bleeding into the mountains like a dying flame. He drew the revolver slowly, the sound of the metal scraping against leather echoing in the still air. For a moment, everything stopped, even the wind. Clara closed her eyes, lips trembling, tears running down her cheeks. "Make it quick," she whispered. Jeb's thumb rested on the hammer. His finger found the trigger. And he froze. The gun felt like a sin in his hand. He couldn't do it, not to her, not like this. Because deep down, beneath all the anger, the hurt, and the years lost, Jeb Callahan still loved her. And that was the one thing he couldn't kill. Behind him, the sound of the approaching riders grew louder. Dust and death were closing in fast. And the rancher, heart breaking, gun shaking, knew the night was about to change everything. For several long seconds, Jeb didn't move. The sound of the oncoming riders thundered through the plains like a storm rolling over the desert, hooves drumming against hard dirt, echoing in the air, closer every heartbeat. The faint whistle of a bullet cut through the distance and struck the fence post behind him. The horses in the corral reared up in panic, their eyes rolling white in terror. Jeb's pulse roared in his ears. His revolver still hung loosely from his fingers, Clara's desperate whisper circling in his mind, "Just make it quick." He couldn't. He wouldn't. He'd spent 3 years cursing her name, but seeing her now, broken, terrified, and still alive, had lit something inside him that he thought long dead. "Get up," he muttered, his voice low and hard. Clara blinked at him, confused. "What?" "I said get up," Jeb barked, louder this time, grabbing her arm and pulling her to her feet. "You're not dyin' here tonight." Her legs wobbled beneath her, and she stumbled against him. He caught her, steadying her with hands that had mended fences and broken wild horses but never stopped shaking now that they touched her again. "You don't understand," she gasped. "They'll kill us both. They'll burn this place down to cinders." "Then let 'em try," Jeb growled. "Ain't the first time I've had devils at my door." He dragged her into the barn, kicking the door shut behind them. The smell of hay, gun oil, and horses filled the air. The dim lantern light flickered against the wooden beams, throwing shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. He shoved a pile of hay aside, revealing an old trapdoor, a storm cellar he'd dug himself years back, during a particularly mean winter. "Down there," he ordered. "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." Clara's eyes went wide. "Jeb, I can't just hide while you—" He cut her off sharply. "You can, and you will. You already took one chance too many in this life. You ain't talkin' another tonight." Tears welled in her eyes. She opened her mouth to argue, but the pounding of hooves outside silenced her. The barn walls trembled with the force of it. Voices, harsh, laughing, drunk on cruelty, echoed through the yard. Jeb grabbed a rifle from the wall and checked the chamber. "Go," he said, voice hard as iron. Clara's lip trembled. "Why are you doing this?" He paused for a heartbeat, eyes never leaving the door. "Because I still remember who you were, before him." That broke her. With shaking hands, she lifted the hatch and descended into the darkness below. Jeb threw the hay back over the trapdoor and pulled the lantern wick low, letting the barn sink into shadow. He crouched behind the nearest stall, rifle ready, heart pounding like war drums. The first rider's shout came seconds later. "We know she's here, Callahan. Hand her over, and maybe we'll let you die quick." Jeb didn't answer. The gang dismounted, boots crunching over the gravel. 6 men, rough, armed, and mean, moved toward the barn. Their leader was tall and thin, his face marked by a long scar that cut through his mouth, giving him a permanent sneer. He was Duke Harlan, the very man Clara had left Jeb for. He kicked open the barn doors, laughing low. "Well, look what we got here," he said, stepping inside with a lazy swagger. "Old Jeb Callahan, still playin' cowboy." Jeb rose slowly from behind a stall, rifle leveled. "You're trespassing," he said, voice calm, but every word dripped with venom. Duke smirked. "Where's my girl?" "Ain't your girl anymore," Jeb said evenly. Duke's smile faltered. "You really think you can hide her from me?" Jeb's finger curled on the trigger. "I don't hide folks. I protect 'em." For a moment, the barn was silent, then everything erupted. Gunfire tore through the still air. The first bullet whizzed past Jeb's head, splintering the beam beside him. He dropped to one knee, fired once, and sent Duke's right-hand man crashing into the hay with a scream. Chaos exploded. Horses reared, kicking and shrieking. The lantern shattered, spilling fire across the floorboards. Smoke and dust filled the air. Jeb fired again, another man falling. Pain seared through his shoulder as a bullet grazed him, hot blood running down his sleeve. He gritted his teeth and kept shooting. Every crack of the rifle echoed like thunder. One by one, the gang fell, grunting, shouting, cursing his name. Down below, in the cellar, Clara pressed her hands over her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks as the sounds of gunfire and destruction raged above her. Every shot was a hammer against her heart. She wanted to scream, to run to him, but Jeb's last words echoed in her mind. "No matter what you hear." And then, suddenly, the gunfire stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the creak of wood, the faint crackle of burning hay, and the wind moaning through the bullet holes in the walls remained. Clara held her breath in the darkness, listening, waiting, praying that the footsteps she'd hear next wouldn't be those of Duke Harlan. Up above, the world had gone still. And somewhere in that smoke-filled barn, Jeb Callahan stood among the ruin, bleeding, breathing hard, and waiting for the next move. The world was quiet now, too quiet. Smoke hung heavy in the barn, swirling in the dying light that filtered through bullet holes and broken boards. The sharp scent of gunpowder and blood mixed with the acrid sting of burning hay. Outside, the last of the daylight bled away into purple twilight, and the plains stretched endlessly, still, empty, and silent. Beneath the barn floor, Clara pressed a trembling hand against the trapdoor. Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. For a moment, she thought she heard footsteps, slow, dragging, and the faint clink of a rifle being reloaded. She waited, breath held, until the silence grew unbearable. Finally, she pushed the hatch open. The barn was a ruin. Smoke stung her eyes as she climbed out, coughing softly, trying to make sense of the devastation around her. The ground was littered with spent shells and bodies. The men who had come for her now lay sprawled in the dirt, still as the cattle skulls that marked the fence posts. The fire from the shattered lantern had mostly died, smoldering in little black patches across the floor. And then, she saw him. Jeb Callahan was slumped against a wooden post, his rifle still in his hands. Blood soaked through his shirt, dark and glistening. His breath came shallow and slow, his eyes half open, fixed somewhere between exhaustion and peace. "Jeb!" Clara cried, rushing to his side. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she pressed them against the wound in his shoulder, then the one in his side. "Stay with me, please." He looked at her, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. "You're still here," he rasped. "Didn't I tell you to stay down?" Her tears came hard and fast. I thought you were dead." He coughed, wincing. "Not yet, though I reckon I've been better." His eyes shifted toward the barn door, where the wind blew through the bodies outside. "Did I get 'em all?" She swallowed hard, scanning the scene. "I think so. Then it's a fair trade." But before she could answer, a movement caught her eye, a faint rustle near the doorway. Her blood ran cold. One of the men wasn't dead. Duke Harlan, the scarred outlaw, the one who'd stolen her from this place and from the man beside her, was crawling across the ground. His face was streaked with blood and dust, but the rage in his eyes burned brighter than ever. He reached for his revolver, his voice low and venomous. "Ain't over yet, sweetheart." "Jeb!" Clara screamed. Jeb tried to raise his rifle, but his strength was gone. The weapon slipped from his grasp, hitting the ground with a dull thud. Duke's fingers brushed the butt of his pistol, and that's when Clara moved. She didn't think. She just acted. Her hand darted for Jeb's Colt, lying beside him. She lifted it with both hands. It felt impossibly heavy, cold, real. Duke looked up just in time to see her pull the trigger. The gunshot echoed like thunder in the hollow barn. The bullet struck him square in the chest, sending him sprawling backward into the dust. For a moment, his eyes locked with hers, shock, anger, something like regret, then they went still. Clara froze, the Colt trembling in her hands. Her ears rang from the blast. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound she'd ever known. Jeb's voice broke it, weak but steady. "Didn't think you had that in you." She turned to him, tears streaking down her face. "You saved me. I had to." He managed a faint chuckle that turned into a cough. "Guess you did the unthinkable too." She took his hand, gripping it tight, desperate to keep him anchored. "Don't you dare leave me, Jeb Callahan. Not again. Not like this." He smiled faintly, eyes soft despite the pain. "I ain't goin' anywhere, just restin' my eyes." "Please," she begged, pressing her forehead to his. "I was wrong to leave. I thought there was more out there, gold, excitement, but all I ever wanted was right here. I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." He looked at her for a long moment, his thumb brushing her cheek. His hand was rough, trembling, but gentle, the same way it used to be when he'd wiped the dust from her face after a long day on the range. "You don't gotta be sorry," he whispered. "I already forgave you." Her breath caught in her throat. "When? The day you left," he said, his voice barely audible now. "Took me a few bottles of whiskey to admit it, but, yeah. I forgave you then. Just never figured you'd come back to hear it." Her tears fell freely now, streaking the dirt on his face as she cupped it in her hands. Then don't go. Please. We can start over. We can. But he didn't answer. His eyes, warm and tired, were already glazing over, his chest rising slower, until it stopped. Clara sat there for what felt like forever, the weight of silence pressing down on her. The world outside was quiet, save for the creak of the windmill and the mournful cry of the wind rolling over the plains. She rested her forehead against his, her voice breaking. "You did make it quick," she whispered. "But not for me." The last of the sun dipped below the hills, and the ranch fell into darkness, a quiet place where love, forgiveness, and tragedy lay buried together in the Wyoming dust.